You ever see a headline and instantly feel like, wait, what? Because that's exactly what people felt waking up to Anthony Joshua's name trending. Not for a fight, not for a call out, but because of a road crash in Nigeria that turned fatal. And here's the part that makes this story hit different. It didn't happen in some random moment years after his career cooled off. This is happening right after one of the biggest spotlight fights of the year, right when people were talking about his next move, his next payday, his next opponent. But instead of a victory lap, the first images going around show AJ dazed, shirtless, surrounded by broken glass and a crowd that looks both shocked and confused. So what really happened on that road? Who was with him? And why are the official details still not fully lining up? Because the deeper you go, the more you realize the crash isn't the only mystery here. Next, let me walk you through the timeline and the moment everything changed in seconds. Here's what multiple reports agree on. This happened on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway in Nigeria, in the Ogun State area, around Makun, near the Sagamu side. And it was late morning, around 11 a.m. local time. Joshua was a passenger in a Lexus SUV. Some outlets call it a Lexus Jeep. And the vehicle ended up colliding with a stationary truck or lorry parked along the road. Now, the reason the internet exploded isn't just because he was in a crash. It's because footage and photos started circulating fast. AJ still inside the vehicle. AJ being helped out. AJ moving slowly like he's trying to get his balance. And then reports saying 2 other people didn't make it. Authorities said Joshua had minor injuries and was taken for medical attention. And later updates described him as stable. But when you see those images, the question becomes, if he's minor injured, why does he look that shaken? And if 2 people lost their lives, who were they? And that's where the story instantly stops being a crash update and starts becoming something heavier. Because next, you have to ask, why was Anthony Joshua on that road in the first place? Right now. Joshua being in Nigeria isn't random. He's always been vocal about his Nigerian roots, and by most accounts, he spends time there, especially around the end-of-year period. People close to the region have said he blends in more out there, not as a global superstar, but as family. And the timing matters. He had just come off that massive Jake Paul event, the kind of fight that isn't just boxing. It's culture, business, controversy, and a giant global audience watching. So when AJ leaves that spotlight and ends up on one of the busiest highways in Nigeria during holiday traffic season, you're dealing with a whole different environment. Road conditions, driving patterns, heavy movement, convoys, security. Everything changes. And according to reports you provided, there may have been multiple vehicles traveling together from Joshua's party. Some eyewitness accounts even suggest a vehicle behind them was part of the group. That detail is important because it explains why the response at the scene looked the way it looked. People rushing in, crowds gathering, phones already recording, and security trying to control a moment that can't be controlled. And next, we need to talk about the scene itself, because it tells you why this story turned viral so fast. Look at how these situations unfold in real life. It's not like a clean movie scene where everyone knows what to do. It's noise, panic, traffic still moving, people trying to help, and a crowd forming in seconds. Some reports say Joshua was inside the vehicle for several minutes before fully coming around. Others mention he was trapped and then helped out. And in the footage described in the reporting, you see him grimacing and moving cautiously. Then there's the other side. The truck involved. Officials released images showing damage to the truck and the SUV. And the story becomes bigger than AJ, because it includes 2 other lives that ended right there on that road. This is why the comments online got intense. You had people showing sympathy, and you also had people saying, something about this feels off. Not necessarily because they had proof, but because the details were coming out in fragments. And that leads us directly to the biggest retention engine in this whole story, the cause. Because depending on which official quote you read, the crash happened for different reasons. Here's where it gets tricky, and you can't ignore it. One official account highlights a tire burst that caused the driver to lose control. Another official statement emphasizes excess speed and wrongful overtaking, saying the Lexus was suspected of traveling beyond the legal speed limit and lost control during an overtaking maneuver before hitting a stationary truck. Now, these two things can both be true. A tire issue at high speed during an overtake is the perfect recipe for disaster. But when the public sees multiple explanations floating around at once, it opens a door. People start asking, which part is confirmed? Which part is preliminary? And why do some outlets sound more certain than others? And then the question gets even heavier, because it's not just what caused it. It's who was in the car with him, and why are we still not hearing names? Because next, that missing detail becomes the thing everyone keeps circling back to. Authorities confirmed 2 people lost their lives in the crash, but identities weren't immediately made public in the reporting you pasted. Then you have another layer. Some officials describe them as foreign nationals. And once that phrase hit the internet, it immediately created more questions than answers. Because people want to know, were they part of his team, friends, trainers, staff, security, visitors? Why is it being described in such broad terms? And when the names aren't confirmed quickly, the internet does what it always does. It fills the silence with guesses. That's why you saw comment sections turning into debate rooms. People arguing about seatbelts, speed, road conditions, even conspiracy talk, all because the most basic details weren't locked down publicly yet. And to be clear, not having names publicly confirmed right away doesn't automatically mean something shady happened. Sometimes it's simply family notification, paperwork, and official process. But in a viral story, delay equals speculation. And next, you're going to see how even AJ's own promoter reacted, because what he said was careful, and what he didn't say mattered just as much. Eddie Hearn's reaction is a perfect example of how fast a story can move before the inner circle even catches up. He basically said he woke up to the news, they were trying to contact Anthony, and he didn't want to speculate. But from the images he'd seen, AJ appeared okay. That's a cautious statement. It's not dramatic. It's not giving you exclusive details. It's the kind of response you give when you're still waiting for a direct call or verified update. But online, people don't sit in cautious. They sit in emotion. So as soon as Hearn confirms he doesn't have the full picture yet, the audience feels the vacuum. If the promoter doesn't know everything yet, what else is still unknown? And in a story where 2 lives were lost, unknown isn't just curiosity, it's pressure. Next, the person who surprisingly shifted the tone was the last guy AJ fought, Jake Paul. Jake Paul didn't have to say anything, but he did. And what he posted wasn't about boxing hype or rivalry. It was basically, life matters more than boxing, and he's praying for the people affected, including the lives lost. That changes the energy of the story, because suddenly it isn't just AJ news. It becomes a human moment where even the opponent is stepping out of character. And it also reminds people how close the timing is. 1 week, you're watching them share a ring with millions watching. Next week, you're reading that AJ survived a crash that turned fatal. That emotional whiplash is why people stayed glued to updates all day. But it also raised a bigger point that a lot of outsiders don't think about. Travel after major events. The fatigue, the schedule changes, the pressure, the move-fast lifestyle. And when you combine that with one of the busiest highways during a holiday season, you start realizing the road itself is part of the story. Next, let's talk about why the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway keeps coming up, and why locals call it dangerous. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway isn't just a random road. It's one of the main arteries connecting Nigeria's biggest city to another major region, and it's heavily traveled. especially during the festive season when people are moving back and forth. Some reports describe it as one of the deadliest roads, and even if you don't label it that, you can understand the risk. Speed, congestion, heavy trucks, breakdowns, vehicles stopped on the side, sudden overtakes. It's the kind of environment where one mistake becomes everyone's problem. And in this case, the truck being described as stationary and parked by the side of the road is a major detail, because that means the danger wasn't just two cars collided. It was a moving vehicle meeting a fixed obstacle at speed. Now combine that with early official language about overtaking, and you can see why people immediately started debating. Was this preventable? Was it simply bad luck? Was it a mix of human decision and mechanical failure? Because the internet doesn't just debate facts, it starts building narratives. Next, I'm going to explain why so many people online instantly said, "This feels off," and what that reaction actually tells you. When a major celebrity survives a fatal incident, the internet almost always reacts the same way. Grief, shock, and then a flood of theories. You saw it in the comments. People claiming it's bigger than an accident, people bringing up spiritual talk, organized chaos, even the kind of conspiracies that show up whenever fame and tragedy collide. But here's the important part. None of that is proof. It's emotion trying to make sense of something senseless. Because think about the psychology. Two people don't make it, but the most famous person does. The human brain looks for a pattern. People start asking, why them and not him? Even though survival can come down to seat position, seatbelt use, angle of impact, seconds, inches. So instead of amplifying unverified claims like they're facts, the real story is actually simpler and sometimes more haunting. A few seconds on a busy highway can change multiple families forever. And here's the twist. The speculation wave itself becomes part of the news cycle because it pressures officials to clarify details faster. So next, let's go back to what's been reported about who was traveling with Joshua and what eyewitnesses claimed about a convoy. One eyewitness report mentioned that there were two vehicles traveling together from Joshua's party. Another claim suggested a security team was in a vehicle behind them. Again, key phrase, reported. Not every witness account is perfect and people can mix up details in the moment. But the convoy idea matters for two reasons. It explains why help arrived fast, not just random passers-by, but people attached to his movement. It adds urgency to the questions about the passengers. Because if this was a normal, private trip, that's one thing. If this was a coordinated movement with multiple vehicles, that's a different level of planning, which brings up questions about speed, spacing, overtaking behavior, and how quickly a situation can go wrong when the pace is aggressive. And then you have the official line. Rescue happened, Joshua was transported for care, and he later was described as stable and conscious. But still, we're left with gaps. And when gaps exist, the next chapter becomes, what are the authorities saying now? And what are they still not saying? Officials involved include local police in Ogun State and the Federal Road Safety Corps. Police statements emphasize Joshua being in the rear seat, sustaining minor injuries and receiving medical attention, while two other passengers lost their lives. The FRSC statements leaned hard into traffic violations, suspected speeding, wrongful overtaking, and then loss of control before striking a stationary truck. And then you have continuing investigation language, circumstances being investigated, preliminary findings, updates to follow. That phrase, preliminary, is important. It's a reminder that early narratives can shift. And that's why different headlines might sound like they're telling different stories. Now here's what people miss. The official process after an incident like this can be slower than social media demands. Reports must be written, identities confirmed, families notified, statements coordinated. But the internet doesn't wait for that. The internet decides the story in real time. And next, we have to talk about the pressure layer that nobody wants to mention out loud. The business of boxing, and how fast AJ's life was moving right before this crash. Anthony Joshua isn't just an athlete. He's a global brand with schedules that are planned like major events. Right before this crash, the talk was already swirling about what comes next. Possible big fights, major promotions, and huge money on the table. That's not gossip. That's how top-level boxing works. One win puts you back in position. One moment can rebuild your storyline, and suddenly the next year is being mapped out by promoters, partners, and power players. And that's what makes this crash feel like it happened at the worst possible time. Not because of money, but because it puts reality back in front of everybody. A fighter can be built like a tank, trained for war, and still be vulnerable to normal life. Now, add the fact that AJ reportedly was in Nigeria recovering, moving around during the holidays, dealing with travel, convoys, road risk. The question becomes, how does a person mentally process surviving a fatal situation when two others don't? Because next, the emotional fallout after a survival moment like this can last longer than any injury. Here's something people don't talk about enough. Surviving an incident like this can mess with you even if your injuries are minor. Because your body might heal quickly, but your mind replays the moment on loop. The sound, the swerve, the impact, the glass, the chaos, the realization that two people didn't make it. And for someone like Joshua, who lives in a world where he's expected to be strong, composed, unbreakable, there's also the public pressure. Do I speak? Do I stay quiet? Do I show emotion? Do I keep it moving? That's why you often see fighters go silent after real-life incidents. Not because they're hiding, but because they're processing. And this is where the internet can become toxic fast. People demand a statement like it's entertainment, while real families are grieving. Which is also why I'm watching one specific thing moving forward. When the identities of the two men are confirmed publicly, the entire tone of the story will shift again. But before we get there, we have to address the rumor wave carefully, because it's already influencing how people are talking about this. Online, you've already seen the chatter. People saying this was meant to happen. People tying it to fame, sacrifice talk, and other claims that spread fast because they're dramatic. Let me be clear. Those are unverified internet narratives. They are not confirmed facts. And usually, they blow up for one reason. They give people a simple storyline when real life is complicated. The confirmed elements here already explain a lot. A busy expressway, a stationary truck, suspected speed and overtaking, and even a reported tire issue. Any one of those can create a fatal situation. You don't need a conspiracy for tragedy to happen. But rumor content is still worth mentioning, not because it's true, but because it shows you what people do when official details come in slowly. They create their own version. So the smart move is to separate feelings from facts. Next, I'm going to tighten the story back to what we can responsibly say, and the specific questions that still need answers. Here's the clean version, without the noise. Joshua was in the backseat of a Lexus on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. The Lexus hit a stationary truck, lorry. Two people lost their lives at the scene. Joshua had minor injuries and was taken for care, later described as stable. Authorities mentioned factors like suspected speeding, overtaking, and also a reported tire burst in some accounts. The investigation is ongoing. Now here's what still matters and still isn't fully settled publicly. Names and roles of the two men who lost their lives. The final, unified explanation of the cause. Mechanical issue, driver decisions, road conditions, or a mix. Confirmation of who else was involved in the movement. Convoy details. Whether Joshua will speak publicly and when. Because the next update that drops, even one small confirmed detail, is going to reshape the entire conversation again. Next, before we close, there's one angle that keeps coming up in the comments, and it's actually the most real part of this story. Preventability. Whenever a crash goes fatal, people immediately debate, could this have been avoided? And with what's been reported, stationary truck, suspected speed, overtaking, it's natural that people bring up basics like seat belts, safe following distance, and not forcing a pass. Not to preach, but to be honest. Holiday traffic is where small mistakes turn deadly. More cars, more pressure, more impatience, more fatigue. And it's also where a breakdown on the side of the road becomes a trap. Because one vehicle stopped can trigger sudden lane changes, sudden overtakes, and that one split-second decision can be the difference between close call and catastrophe. So if you're watching this story and thinking, man, that could be anybody, you're not wrong. Fame doesn't cancel physics, which brings us to what happens next and what updates to watch for, because the next confirmed detail will hit like a wave. Here's what to watch for in the next 24 to 72 hours. Official confirmation of the identities of the two men. Any direct statement from Joshua or his team once they're ready. A more detailed official report that clarifies whether the primary trigger was mechanical failure, speed, overtaking, or both. Verification around the convoy accounts and who was in which vehicle. Any confirmed medical update beyond minor injuries and stable. Because right now, the story is living in that weird space where the headline is clear, but the human details aren't fully public yet. And once those human details drop, the comments will change, the tone will change, the questions will get sharper, which leads to the biggest question of all, the one nobody can answer cleanly. Why do moments like this happen right after the spotlight? This is the part that gets in your head. You can train for years, win titles, beat a viral opponent on a global stream, and still be one normal day away from something you can't control. That's why people react so emotionally to this story. It's not just about Anthony Joshua, it's about the idea that life can flip on you instantly, and sometimes it spares the person you expect it to take and takes the people you never even got to learn about. So, I want to ask you something. Do you think this story stays quiet once the identities are confirmed? Or do you think it gets louder? And do you think Joshua speaks publicly soon? Or does he disappear for a while and let officials handle it? Because either way, the next chapter of this story hasn't been written yet, and the updates are going to hit fast. Let's close this out with one final thought, and I want you to tell me in the comments what you think is the biggest unanswered question. I'll say it like this. The facts we have are already heavy. 2 lives were lost, Joshua was injured, and the situation is still being investigated. But the reason this story is sticking in people's minds is because of what we don't know yet, and because the timing feels surreal. So drop a comment. What's the one detail you're waiting on before you make up your mind about what really happened here? And if you've ever driven a highway during holiday traffic, you already know how fast things can go left. So if this video made you think even a little, hit the like, because it pushes this out to more people who are following the updates. And I'll keep it real. When the next confirmed update drops, names, report, statement, that's when the story changes again. If you want the next chapter when it drops, subscribe.